Hi, my name's Nikki Williams, and I'm the Director of Campaign and Communities for the Wildlife Trusts. Today, I'm going to be chatting through how we've shifted to taking a community organising approach to working within communities and helping people to have more agency over their beliefs and values when it comes to nature and having more nature around them. How we've had to restructure and change ourselves as a movement and as organisations to make that happen, and how we've listened and learned from different generations and stakeholders to make sure that we can be as relevant as possible to people's everyday needs.
Today, we are delighted to be joined by Nikki Williams, who's the Director of Campaigning and Communities at the Wildlife Trusts. She brings a deep expertise in kind of member-led and purpose-driven organisations with, I think, is it over 800,000 members?
Yeah, we're just
Nikki?
getting towards 1 million now, so we're growing all the time.
Wow. So yeah, definitely a lot of expertise there, and really around blending community design and campaigning and governance, and also just that kind of how to bring communities together and turn grassroots energy into lasting systemic change. Nikki, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, wow, 1 million members. That's aspirational. So how did you get started in the member space, and how your brand, the Wildlife Trust, supports members and communities at the moment?
So for me personally, I've always worked in member-led organisations. I've got the National Trust and Woodland Trust in my background, and now at the Wildlife Trusts. So it's always been in that environmental space. I'm a bit of a passport holder. But the beauty and the difference of the Wildlife Trust is that we're a federated structure. So we are 46 separate charities. We cover all of the UK, including the devolved nations and some of the Crown dependencies. And then I work in the 47th Wildlife Trust, which is the sort of umbrella charity that helps us all sort of move and function together. Some of us say we're a bit like a murmuration of starlings. So it means that we all dance in a really good way. That means we can make a difference for nature.
That's a lot of moving parts to kind of be on top of there. Yeah. What kind of experience did you bring to that from, as you say, like the National Trust and the Woodland Trust, into that keeping everyone moving in the same murmuration?
Yeah, so I think I've always been involved in sort of very agency and activity based work, and very much that sort of how people can have a voice and have a belief and be able to turn that into something for the cause that they believe in. So I came to the Wildlife Trust with the first person who got the word campaigner in their title when I was first made director. We'd always done it sort of through comms and a lower level, but as a movement of Wildlife Trust, there was a real desire to really show that we were this sleeping giant, this amazing network of local charities that have their roots deeply into communities. And every Wildlife Trust comes from a group of people who just said, no, we're not having this for nature, and we're going to stand up for it, and we're going to believe in it, and we're going to fight for it. And that grows into one of our formal charities, which creates this amazing, beautiful network of organisations. Literally, some of us are 3 people, a dog and a boat, and others are 200 members of staff. So there's no cookie cutter in the Wildlife Trusts. And so what that really helped me bring was that belief that everybody has a right to fight for what they believe in, and everybody should be in a position where they can have that agency to really make a positive change where they live. And that's what the Wildlife Trust allows. Yes, we do reserves. Yes, we do great ranges and landscape scale work. But what we're really good at is being part of our communities and understanding what people need, or helping people realize what can improve where they live through the power of nature. And so it's a real opportunity to take everything that I've learned over the years, from site management through to organizational changes, volunteer management, to be able to put it into this amazing organization that I'm in now.
Absolutely. I think that's really, you kind of say there's this shared goal, this shared vision of looking after nature, the basic crux of it. obviously that's how a lot of associations are set up. They're set up to look after a particular trade, a particular area of expertise. Have you kind of seen that change in recent years? That the value of what you bring to your members and your stakeholders, or is it still just that core belief?
Well, I think there is that core belief of what of nature for nature's sake, absolutely. But what we're definitely seeing is people understanding how they connect into nature, how we are part of nature, how that improves our health and well-being, how that can inspire our creativity, how that can improve where we live and create pride of place in where you live, because you can improve it because you take care of it through nature, and that it can create some real community cohesion. Because when you're solving that problem together of learning how to grow things, how by looking after and growing things together, that can provide food, or it can provide a space where you no longer feel lonely because you've got other people around you, how you meet your neighbours to solve a problem, to clean up an area. This all becomes how people understand how we are intrinsically connected into nature. It's really easy to forget, because of the systems that we live within, that nature provides our clean water, it provides our food, it provides our shelter, and it provides the air we breathe. And when we forget that, we damage it and destroy it at our peril. And that's what we're actually doing, is we're helping people realize what is the absolute cornerstone of survival for our species, the human on the planet. And it is looking after those things that provide the network and source of what we need to just be able to function and be here in the first place.
Absolutely. And I think you've got an issue there of kind of the whole sustainable, kind of environmental aspect of it. But then if we kind of drill down into your members a bit more, the people who make up the 47 organizations within it, what are the kind of challenges you're seeing at the minute for them as members, and then also for you as a kind of umbrella for all those? What kind of challenges are you seeing for them as individuals?
Yeah, I mean, I think our biggest challenge is that we have currently a government that has a rhetoric that is that somehow nature stops economic growth and it's a blocker, and it is damaging the country that we live in, as opposed to enhancing and improving and being the life source of the country that we live in. And so it doesn't matter where you are at the moment, that is definitely a challenge. And as a result of that, we're seeing people feel unheard and like they really are struggling to get their message through to decision makers and representatives in a way that means that out the other side, policies, the language that's used by our politicians does not go against their core beliefs, which is that nature is critical and important. And that means that it's hard to keep people motivated whether they want to donate a fiver out of their hard-earned wage at a time when people are struggling, motivated to get up in the morning and go and become a volunteer, motivated to sign a petition. We have to bring the hope and the reassurance that it's worth the fight. This is a fight worth having, and that everything that everybody contributes at every level is making a difference. And we are making a difference. We are seeing small changes. It's not fantastic, but if we didn't have that at all, it would be devastating for nature and people. So everybody's contribution absolutely helps, and but we have to keep the energy, we have to keep the hope, because otherwise it's easy for people day to day to not have that. So that's our challenge at the moment.
And you've got a strong belief there. You've kind of got this, as we said, the mission, the vision. I suppose what I'm trying to ask is, are you seeing that get across? How are you able to get that message across if the politicians aren't supporting it, and as you say, the media is putting out that? Are you seeing any channels where you are getting that message across? And if so, have they changed recently?
Yeah, so the place that we actually see it get across is in communities. So within communities, people are making a difference. We've started to talk about needing to be more punk. Basically, don't wait for the permission from politicians. Go out there, try and take over that local area of nature, make it better for nature, make it better for you, make it better for the local school so that the school kids have got places to go to as outdoor classrooms. And we are really seeing that happen on the ground. We did a program called Next Door Nature. This is where we wanted to shift from a sort of typical conservation project process, which is we go into somewhere, we've got an idea, we tell people this is our idea. Are you in or you're out? Those that are in, come and have a go. Normally funded for about 2 to 3 years. And then that funding disappears. And after that, it's really hard to keep that community going and keep that space healthy and nature rich. So what we now do is we take a community organizing approach. We use the principles of community organizing. So we're not purists, but we use those principles. And by using those principles, what we can do is help people to feel more equipped to be able to advocate for what they want in their local area. And we start by listening, and we go in and we know that we need to be part of that community, not telling that community. So we work out what's happening, what are the challenges, what is going wrong, what do people feel out of control of is being inflicted on them. And from that, we can find ways that nature can give people back agency and improve. And so we have got lots of stories of people meeting their neighbours for the first time, even though they've lived somewhere for 10 years, to improve an area by planting flowers together. And then from planting flowers together, you start to get people leaving little messages saying, thank you for this. This is brightening my day. It makes where we live better. And then people start to join in. And so that taking it yourself, that, punk ethic of have a go. What's the worst that can happen? And yes, some people do worry because they think I'm going to plant something and it's going to die. That's okay. Plant it again, have another go, learn from it. And what the Wildlife Trust do is help people build their skills, build their confidence. And through their skills and confidence, they build agency. And by agency, I mean then they've got a story to tell when they go to the council, when they go to their MP and say, look what we've achieved. Look how it's improved where we live. Look how it's tackling these problems, as well as creating a beautiful nature space. And we're all talking about enjoying seeing bees flying past our windows or butterflies in the gardens that we share. So this is just a win-win, and it just gives people an authentic, genuine, personal story for why nature is critically important. And that is so much stronger than here is a list of stats and facts that are very top level, very high, and you don't feel an ownership of. So it's really hard to go and talk to your MP about that list of percentages and numbers and stats. It's not so difficult to have a human conversation like me and you are having now about why I care. And I care because this is my life experience. And that's where we've seen change happen.
Love that. And I think the punk, ask forgiveness, not permission. It's a really key aspect of things at the minute. You've got to kind of try things. You mentioned they're kind of ambassadors. You're using human, actual stories, real case studies, if we want to use the business word. But yeah, these kind of ambassadors for the Wildlife Trust. Are you seeing any kind of impact there in not just on the politicians, but really on that kind of how you're connecting with other communities, moving into new spaces, moving into new members, into, and I'll say new generations who perhaps nature is important to, but they maybe don't know how to make it important to them yet.
Yeah, certainly. One of the things that does happen is we've been working in areas such as Derby City Centre is a great example. We've got a phenomenal community organiser who works for Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. And he started working with the Pakistani community initially to be able to clean up and change different areas within the city centre. Often the little sort of jitties and ways that people could walk to school and stuff like that were just there's fly tipping and horrible stuff going on, and they just wanted to clean it up. And by working within the local school, the Pakistani community connected into the local school. That meant that they could then build build relationships. That meant that they started to work together. They litter picked, then they started to plant, put in place different sort of flowers and nice things that they could see as they walked, but also the kids could learn from. started a bit of food growing. And what happens is then kids start walking to school instead of getting in the car. So that's another good, that reduces impact on the planet. So you see those kind of changes, and the next community along can see that. They physically experience it. So then they ask, well, what happened? They make an introduction. Here's our, speak to the Wildlife Trust. They'll help you with that. And that's what I mean by leaving the communities better equipped, because by the time we're moving on to the next community, people have built their skills. We're still there as a support. You can still chat to us. We'll still come in when you're at the next stage or you want something else. But that recommendation really helps us to then do something which is important for nature, which is connecting up corridors of nature. So big areas that you're used to seeing, maybe reserves that you expect a wildlife trust to look after. They then start to get these corridors of connectivity that species can move along. And when they can move along, they've got more chance of survival because they can forage for food, they can find mates. So that way you start to build better networks for nature. So it's people networks and nature networks working in harmony. And that creates a much more robust and resilient natural environment that also means that it's providing all the good stuff that we need to be a healthy species as well. So that's on a very practical level that we'll see that kind of thing happen. And then with new generations, for example, we've done a lot of work around Generation Z, and where are they at the moment? We did a large research piece with an organisation called Uprising, just to understand why so many were feeling quite despondent, sort of feeling like big infrastructure programs or big organisations or big brands weren't delivering for them. Not really had great experiences politically of things that would impact positively on their lives. And by working with them, we've developed programs such as the Environmental Leadership Program, which is about developing soft skills. So what are your leadership through sort of campaigning for nature, but also just being within nature or learning within nature so that you start to build some of those employability skills. And then you also build an appreciation for nature, which means that perhaps when you're in your first job or you're working through, you're the person who starts the green group up in your corporate organization, or you challenge something that's happening. So what you're doing is building this network of advocates who feel that we're back to agency. They've got the skill, the right to make that happen. And then we've also just in the process of, we've just finished building our first steering group for young people. And we've actually interviewed, we had nearly 200 applicants, and we've managed to narrow down to 15 phenomenal people aged between the age of 18 and 30 who are going to sit alongside our council. And they will be part of our strategy refresh. So they will be, really influential in that, looking at how we campaign and also advising our council, because what we have is, as you would expect from an organisation like us, a certain type of council with a certain type of person sat on it, making decisions without any of the life experience of what it's like to be right now of that generation, trying to find a job, trying to make your way, trying to make the right decisions that meet your values, so that we have got those perspectives and those voices at the table of decision making within the wildlife trusts. Because otherwise we stop being relevant. And that's what every wildlife trust, if you put us all in a room, we all soon get to the subject of relevance. And we've learned working with other people, listening really well, that's when we stay relevant, because we understand other people's needs and perspectives as opposed to just our own vision of what good nature looks like.
So yeah, and I think relevancy is a topic that keeps coming up when we have these conversations. I'm interested to know from your role now, but also your previous experience, when you have such a diverse network of stakeholders, whether that's 1 million members or that's all the different types of councils and the 46 other organizations under your umbrella, how do you kind of make sure you're staying relevant to everyone, or have you kind of decided to not do that and segment? What's been your approach to that?
So there is a certain amount of segmenting that goes on, but because we're broken down, like when I was in previous large top-down organizations, you would be making those decisions much more clearly, of we're going to have to focus on these but not on them. What's different for the Wildlife Trust is each Wildlife Trust has a completely unique context of where it sits. So if you're one of the Welsh Wildlife Trusts, your politics is different, your makeup is different, everything changes. So it does mean that we flex a lot into those different areas so that what we're ambitious for is to represent the communities that sit around each of a wildlife trust, as opposed to having a one-shop stop approach, because that is, otherwise we wouldn't be our USP. We wouldn't be that unique of our place organization times 46. So for us, that's how we will look at things. But we will identify, like when we identified, we need to understand Gen Z better, because they are looking for a place. We could be that place. How do we look at how we work collectively? And that's where we come together. That's my role, sat within the centre of a network of charities, is what are the things that if we work together, we'd be better and stronger. And that will often come from a wildlife trust because their feet are on the ground. It's not top down. Taking a community organising approach came from a couple of trusts who were really experiencing on the ground that change. And if we bring it into the central team, and then we dial that up and we all have an agreement together that we're going to do that, that's when we can take a strategic approach and we all follow a similar pattern. And that is secured through our shared strategy. So through our shared strategy, we have 3 goals and a number of transformations that we've agreed, if we all do this, that makes the difference. But that leaves the space for the uniqueness of each individual wildlife trust to thrive and be really out there.
I think that's so interesting, and how you kind of found that organizing outcome approach from just a few of your trusts, and then brought that up and kind of spread it across, like, this, I can't remember what the word is, but where the roots of mushrooms talk to each other. Yeah, I just think it's really fascinating. And it'd be great if you could go a little bit further into that kind of organizing outcome approach and what the benefits have been since you've trialed that out,
Yes.
compared to what you were doing before.
Yeah, certainly. So as I explained earlier, we were of that traditional approach, which is project manager goes in, and it's not necessarily that we wanted to be like that, but funding forces you down that route. So when you've got an outputs approach and you're talking about KPIs and numbers, you end up running a very similar process each time. And you've already pre-designed, in a way, what good looks like. X amount of people will turn up to Y amount of tree planting programs and Z amount of trees go in the ground. It becomes very simplistic. So what we wanted to shift to, the reason we wanted to use community organising principles, is because it's much more about putting a framework in place that is supportive and facilitates what we say is, reciprocal relationships. So we're all there on our own terms. We're not doing it to people. We're identifying what people want to do with us. And by doing that, then we can make sure that we're supporting people appropriately and respectfully to identify what would those changes be, where they are, for nature, for themselves, so that it stays, we're back to that word relevant. So it's relevant because it's decided by them. And then as we sort of realize that they're becoming more independent, we have to let go, step back. It's all about giving up power. So making sure that we don't have that approach, and stepping back and looking at what are those outcomes, and, what are those changes? How many more are people able to do things for themselves and need less support? Are you seeing that there is more nature and nature connectivity in those areas? So it's less, yes, there might be trees in there. Yes, there might be wildflowers in there, but it doesn't matter. It's about the ownership and the variety. Nature is a beautifully, it's so much variety in there and so much diversity in nature. You want people to have the creativity and space to be able to respond and put relevant nature to them and nature that they understand. So it doesn't matter whether it's food growing, as long as people are doing things that are peat free, so they understand that they're not doing more harm than good. So there's where the education and learning comes in. Looking as much as you can at native and resilient versions, so that you know that things you get the reward that they'll grow, but also that you're eating healthy food, you're not putting pesticides on it, so you're not damaging it. All of that, it doesn't have to be, an untouchable thing. Nature doesn't have to be, conservation doesn't have to be an untouchable thing. It can be a very interactive thing. And the way I sort of see it is that our job is, if you are taught how to throw a pot, you need that pot to be able to hold water. But how it is decorated, what kind of clay it's made out of, what it looks like ultimately, what shape it is absolutely the uniqueness of where it has come from and the hands that have touched it and made it. It just holds the water. And that's how we're working really, is we want that uniqueness. That is actually the beauty of that approach, because it creates diverse networks of nature. It reflects and is relevant to the people themselves. So that's how we go for this framework. But the challenge is, you're talking about outcomes, and funders can't pop it in a spreadsheet. So you're constantly having to influence funders that it's okay and it's safe. And I think we're now at that point. We've got quite a big fat report that sits on our website for Next Door Nature called Power to the People. And that report was really critical at the end of, we were funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund. And it was really critical because that is the sort of cushion that we built, which is, it's okay to take this risk. Invest in the process. Don't just invest in a predefined end result, because the process, in that instance, we thought 200 communities would work with us. In 3 years, 1,600 communities work with us. So it's massively more scalable. The impact of your funding is much bigger. You get more people involved. You get a more diverse range of people involved that would normally think a conservation charities for me. So it just ramps up all of your outcomes in just a really brilliant way. It was just a brilliant feeling to know that that works and that's effective, and that you can give that back to your funder rather than a spreadsheet full of numbers.
Everyone involved gets to see the value they create. And I think that's really interesting. I think it's such a great approach based on essentially listening, really, isn't it? If you take it back to the challenges that you said at the top, which is the political, it is, and you've kind of just answered my question there, which is, it is connecting with them. You are able to now show the value that it's creating to those funders and to those politicians. So yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you look at what's happened over in New York with the mayor election, they're putting it all down to that he was a good listener. They went out as a party and just listened, worked out what were those trends, what were the key things they needed to answer, and respond to that. And so it works politically, it works socially, and it works if you want to do more nature in your neighborhood. I mean, it is back to that. When we've got agency and we're involved in it and we own it, then we make it happen as a community.
It's a cross sector. You could literally use it in any type of organization.
Yeah.
I think the element I was kind of keen to drill down a little bit more on is, obviously it's a regional, it's community by community. You're listening, you're working bespoke. There's, as you said at the beginning, it's not a cookie cutter approach here. How does that then, you said it's scalable. How do you make sure that it's scalable based on your team and resources, but also in that kind of message thing of this pot that looks like this and this pot that looks like this can still support that whole umbrella? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's at the cornerstone of what we do. We're something called a directed network. So if anyone wants to go and geek out on community organizing terminology, we're not pure community organizing. We're a directed network. And that's because we all set out knowing that ultimately our role is to support nature's recovery. So when we're going into a community, we might be working in a warm space. We could be working in a women's shelter. But ultimately, we're going in to demonstrate the value of nature and why nature's recovery and looking after it and creating more of it is beneficial to people. And that nugget stays in everything we're doing. So when we're listening for what is it that with our expertise as nature people, we can spot nature can be a solution for that. You often hear nature-based solutions for flooding and, you know, really big things. But for me, these are micro nature-based solutions. And that listening means that we can go, okay, we can be the connector. We're the connector. Our community organisers in the Wildlife Trust are that little connector. And they go, okay, they're worried about that, or that's a challenge for them. And I've seen an example over there of how nature's solved that. And we work as communities of practice because of us being lots of different charities rather than one. And that means other trusts might have, 9 times out of 10, they've seen it. They've seen something similar, so they can share best practice and you can make that connection up for people. And I think that means that we always come back to nature recovery, and that's what we're here for, because then we know that that is the motivation for us being in the room. And we're honest about that as well. You know, we've got a badger on our logo. If you're gonna, we're not going in the room, you know, we're called the Wildlife Trust. I mean, we're not hiding who we are. There's no pretense in there. And we always often work with stakeholders, community leaders, so that when we go in the room, they've already checked us out. They've made sure that we're going in with honesty and integrity, not just because we're going to go in and sort of start stamping our foot and waving our fingers about why they're not doing more nature. That's not our motivation. It is to see nature as those mini nature-based solutions where you live.
I love that. Do more nature. That's a great slogan. You mentioned a lot about, you know, being in the room and going into the communities and kind of, it's obviously really working for you, but we're in a digital world now, like it or loathe it. And I think more often than not, I prefer the natural world. But how are you staying relevant in the digital world and keeping that kind of cycle going with so many more people being online? Have you any experience or things that haven't worked or worked in that kind of realm?
Yeah. So way back when I started, I was part of those people who created online petitions, and they very quickly became clickbait. You know, you could stick a load of funding behind it, stick it out on adverts, loads of people would click it. Didn't really change. It's the equivalent of, you know, getting people along one day in their life to plant a tree, but they never continue that relationship. So
it's just more noise, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just more noise. And of course now it can just be diverted. You can stick a diversion on your inbox and no one really sees what's happening. It's just a big number. And it's very often that politicians will come back and say, well, we're just counting that as one, because you're all saying the same thing. It doesn't matter that you've got 15,000 people. You're all saying the same thing because you're all just putting your name on the bottom of a letter. So we're just going to treat it as one. So we very quickly adapted now, and we fully encourage people to write the content of any response that we've got going in. So the way we will structure our campaigns is here's some information, here's some insight, here's some guidance, but your story is the story that your decision maker needs to make. So, for example, we've just come out of the Planning and Infrastructure Bill campaign. That's been hugely challenging for us. About 135,000 actions have been taken over the past 3 or 4 months by our supporters and members. And the vast majority of those have got personal stories within them. So we encourage people to share. So it's really important now when we're looking at content, because that is the richest content. So in there, we've got, I'm an architect of 20 years, and I hate the fact that there will be a way that nature can be designed out rather than designed in. And they will give you a personal story of why that is so critical. So you get really amazing declarations, as well as people, you know, I remember a time when, and I could walk in the fields, and that's also important too, because that demonstrates the generational loss, and that this will contribute even more to generational loss of nature and connection to nature. So that gives us a much richer and more rounder story based in people's lived experience, not in our stats and facts. It's back to that stats and facts. They're important, they underpin, but they're much more important in the policy world. I'm in the influencing world. So you need those stories. And we've also worked with something now called Postbug, which is amazing. And that is where you can send a solid, real postcard to your MP. And you can write your request and what you want. in there. You can ask to go and have a meeting with your MP if you want, but because you're sending something solid, you can't ignore postcards dropping through your door like you can ignore emails in your inbox. So we're very much looking at what is tangible and what is real and what allows that personal story on the mass as much as in that micro community organising space. And we will be launching new campaigns in the new year as we see more threats coming along to nature through changes that are being proposed by government. And we're drawing on these amazing stories because we have this rich, diverse language now that is the personal experience of professionals and just people wanting to know that where they live is not going to get trashed and not going to get overly developed, and that we'll have nature designed in, because we are big believers that nature should be designed in and not that you should stop development. It is designing in, and that's what we're starting to lose.
And I suppose that there's the tools there for using the digital world, but is there any kind of connecting the communities online, or is it more just working with them individually and supporting them? Or have you any experience in kind of connecting them as separate individuals or organizations or even the 47 kind of charities?
Yeah, so we've just been growing our profile on Discord. So we've been involved in using Discord as a platform for about 12 months. Now, I'm massively out of my depth as I speak to you about this. I have an amazing Gen Z person who understands all this and has set everything up and done all the safeguarding and all the complexities that comes from wanting to help communities talk to each other and come together and debate. But very much what we've done is build a Discord space on a server for the wildlife trusts that currently has about 200 or 300 people in it as we're doing our development and testing of it, that have got different ways to talk to each other. They can talk about nature, they can talk about football, they can talk about just general, what's going on in their lives. And it's how we give them a community space for community to meet other communities, mainly around that millennial Gen Z networks that are building that. And it was built around something called Hope Week. So each year, for the last 3 years, the Wildlife Trust runs a specific program for young people called Hope Week, where instead of sort of all that we're in a crisis, we're all doomed language, we actually try and turn that on its head. And we look at what is the agency, what is the hope, what is the opportunity that people can take hold of. And as many of the steering group that we've brought on will tell us, we're not the next generation, we're alive now, and we want to make change now, and we want to have that ownership to be able to do that now. And we're trying to create those community spaces online that people can have those conversations and work that stuff out together, with us facilitating and making sure it's safe and they're supported, but also they can break off into specialist groups and start to build things. And we've just done last week, we did a gaming session as well. So people gaming around that relates to nature and things like that. So looking at really, you don't have to be in nature to appreciate it. And how can we build on that much more? So that's really exciting. And it's something we're looking to, we'll be looking for funding next to scale up. Now we've sort of cut our teeth a little bit and learned about it. But yes, I have incredibly talented people of the correct generation who know how to say those words without sounding like an old woman, like I do, trying to say words that I shouldn't be saying, so that we can make sure that, again, back to relevance, it's a relevant platform for them. They told us that's where they get on, do things. We have to learn about it.
And we're hearing quite a lot that for specifically the younger generation, but I think, more and more people, but for specifically the younger generation, value-led organizations actually putting on their sleeves what they're doing. And obviously you mentioned at the top that nature is not just about trees, it's mental health, it's about societal health, it's about cultural, all of those things. Obviously, you're mentioning there around kind of listening to that younger generation. And I think we talked quite a bit around ethics, diversity, inclusion. And, it sounds like you're already doing the listening there. Have you kind of had any results off the back of that listening in those kind of terms of the kind of ethical diversity and inclusion
Yeah.
from
So
what you've done as a wildlife?
yeah, so we used to have our EDI team, as it gets labelled, in our HR. Most organisations keep it within an HR function, and we decided about 18 months ago to move EDI into my team because it's about a cultural shift inside and outside the movement, and that we need to reflect the communities that are around us. Therefore, we have to have equity and enable equity to make sure that that happens properly. And we have to work with it sort of consciously all the way through everything we do as a belief and a value, not as something you comply to. So we didn't want to be, compliant to certain systems in HR. We wanted to live and breathe it. We wanted to be anti-racist. We wanted to have those statements front and center. And so because that is part of our thinking, what we saw, again, going back to Next Door Nature, which has now got that lasting legacy for us, is that we have a much more diverse network of people that we work with. We've seen a huge increase in working with people who have health challenges, people who come from underserved communities, people who struggle to stay in formal education, and a wider range of minoritized ethnic communities feeling that they can associate with us and want to be part of working with us. So that to us is critical because as I explained, we all need nature. So therefore we need everyone to feel that they can be part of nature and that they're safe in those spaces and that they can advocate for nature and that they have as much ownership. All of us have an equal amount of ownership, regardless of where we come from. And so that to us is definitely a value that we live and breathe. And we would be stupid, quite frankly, and naive to not have that kind of view of things, because you can't achieve huge change by just thinking you can tell the same old people the same old things over and over again. That isn't what change is about. That's elitism, and we don't want to do that.
Absolutely. I think it's really inspiring, just a simple change of moving a department into a different department is, it doesn't always make sense, but then you do it and you think, of course it makes sense. It's actually quite an inspired idea. And I think a lot of people could learn from that, of where things sit and what leads them. So yeah, fantastic. Nikki, there's been so much in here around, kind of communities and stakeholder listening. For the Wildlife Trust, what's kind of your focus going into 2026 and going forward? And do you feel kind of optimistic about, where these kind of organizations that have members at their heart and a core vision like the Wildlife Trust, where they're going?
Yeah, certainly. So we've just been completing, we're halfway through our strategy, and we've just completed a strategy refresh. And moving forward, we've identified that communities really will drive across our three goals, whether that's nature-based solutions, which is where things like health and wellbeing, education, as well as flood alleviation, rewilding, etc. sits. And then you've got our goals around just, supporting people to have agency and act for nature. And also 30 by 30, which is the main biodiversity ambition, which is 30% of land and sea is dedicated to nature spaces. So there are three areas. But what we have identified is that the power of people enabling that to happen sits at the heart of it, as opposed to when we started 5 years ago, the three were seen as three areas of work. And it's really clear that you can't disconnect them. They have to be linked together to be able to achieve the overarching aim of what our strategy is, to bring nature back. Now, yes, we have a difficult government. There's no two ways about it. We can't put it in any other word, and difficult is a very polite word that I'm using. But that doesn't mean that people don't care. That doesn't mean that we can't build a stronger and more united network through our supporters. So that's what we're planning on doing in February. Towards the back end of February, we will be launching a new campaign on behalf of the Wildlife Trusts. And in that, we will be leaning really hard into the power of people's own stories, the story of self It's a Marshall Gantz piece of work that's tried and tested, and really helping people to see that they have the power and the agency to make the difference. And how can we help to knit all of that together? That in the run up to the next election in 2029, yep, we're planning for that. And that we know that we're going to build over the next 18 months a much stronger base of people running through every constituency that can hold any party, regardless of who is in power, to account when it comes to wanting to see really good policies in place for nature and the environment, health, well-being in relation to nature, and also addressing climate change through nature. We want all of that to be seated in every single party's manifesto, and we are determined to have a bedrock of people large enough to influence that when decisions start being made ready for the next election.
Amazing. And, you know, as you said already, so many things that you've just started trialing, you know, 12 months ago, 18 months ago. So we're really excited to see how they continue to be successful. And thank you so much for bringing so many kind of solutions from what sounds like a different world when you talk about nature and trees and flood defenses, but actually so much is relevant, I think, to all types of organizations. So yeah, it's really inspiring. And thank you so much.
My pleasure. It was lovely to chat.